Welcome back to Wellness Wave Radio. Thanks for tuning in this morning to ride the wave with us. Each week our goal is to give you at least one suggestion that will make your life a little better. My name is Phil George. I'm a clinical biochemist, a certified personal trainer, and a health coach. Please remember that everything we discuss on the show is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. Can we have the next slide, Art? We're in a bunch of different networks. Obviously, we're here on Leicester Cable. We're also on WCRN, which is the Howie Carr station. Also, we're international now. They were picked up. All our shows are being picked up by Dream Vision 7, and we're also on YouTube. So actually, this will wind up on YouTube at some point. So just email me, philgeorge@charted.net, and I can shoot you over these different shows, and you can watch them, anytime you want. Okay, next. Again, there's the health disclaimer. This is not medical information. It's for your information only. Okay, next. I'm going to ramp it up a little bit. I actually say this all the time on my seminars. Don't believe anything I tell you, okay? Because what happens is everybody is different, okay? You may have a different genetics than I do. You may have a different diet than I do. So what I'm going to come up next is basically, it's going to be very controversial. So you'll find this a little unusual. Okay, let's go to the next slide. What is standard of care? Standard of care, what that is, and I was speaking to somebody right before the show, and they say, well, why do doctors do this and why do doctors do that? They have kind of a playbook they have to go by. In fact, in California, if you don't follow standard of care, you can lose your license. I've had many medical professionals on my show, and I've heard this from just about everybody. So this is the way medicine works, is you come in, and let's say you've got high cholesterol. Your cholesterol is X amount. What a doctor will normally do is put you on a statin, okay? They don't have time to sit down with you anymore and talk about your diet or this, that, or other things. They're supposed to put you on a statin. And doctors have told me, specialists have told me, there's no downside for them to put you on a drug, but there is a downside if they do not put you on the drug. The reason is this. Let's say you come in and your cholesterol is 300, and they say, well, why don't you do some diet and exercise and this kind of stuff. And in the meantime, you have a heart attack, and the family members say, well, why didn't you put them on a statin? If they bring this doctor into court, if you bring the doctor into court and you want to file a malpractice suit, every other doctor would say, oh yeah, if he came in, I would have put him on the statin at 300. And contrary, if let's say they put you on a statin, something bad happens to you and you sue them for some reason, every other doctor will say they'll put you on a statin for that particular thing. So this is why they call standard of care. So this is basically two major things doctors have in their, physicians have in their toolbox. One of them is drugs and the other one is surgery, okay? There's not many doctors have the time, unless you have a really good doctor, sit down with you and say, maybe you should exercise, maybe you should change your diet, maybe send you to a nutritionist. So that's the reason, that's what they call standard of care. And most physicians, I'm going to go over next, they're not going to agree with what I'm telling you next. There's no way, because we're going to talk about proton pump inhibitors. And if you come in with acid reflux or GERD, guaranteed they're going to put you on a proton pump inhibitor. Again, I'm begging you guys, do your own research. Don't believe me. If you find something you don't agree with, email me, philgeorge@charted.net, and I'll give you the studies. I'm going to come up with the studies right now. It's going to follow up. So almost everything you're hearing from this point on, which I should back up. So true life story with me. So I have what's called silent acid reflux, which means that I have acid going up there, but I don't have any heartburn, the typical stuff that you see. But I saw a gastroenterologist, and he went in there. He says, you have silent acid reflux, and he says I can put you on a proton pump inhibitor, PPI, Prilosec, Nexium, that kind of stuff. And I knew this before I went in. I said thank you, but no thank you. And then I went back and I saw an ear, nose, and throat doctor. Same thing, to look down there. And she said, you have silent acid reflux. You want a PPI? No, thank you. I'll tell you why I said no, thank you in a couple of minutes. So what I had, basically, I'm in the media business, so my voice is everything. I was having sore throats. I would have to take cough drops nonstop. I had difficulty swallowing sometimes with stuff. These are all signs of acid reflux. So I had all the signs. Fortunately, I'm going to go over what I did basically to cure myself of this without going on proton pump inhibitors. Okay, next slide. The key thing, guys, is you've got to be the CEO of your own health. You've got to do your own research. Again, doctors only have a limited amount of time to spend with you. And they're usually going to put you on a drug or do surgery. Unless you're an exceptional doctor, they're not going to sit down with you and say, do X, Y, and Z. And again, they're kind of forced into this standard of care stuff, because if they don't do standard of care, they could get sued. So that's, again, one of the reasons why they kind of go by the same playbook all over and over again. Okay, what is the difference between acid reflux, heartburn, and GERD? Okay, acid reflux is like a short-term thing. Like you may eat something that doesn't agree with you, and it goes up into your throat. GERD is basically acid reflux that happens over and over and over again, and it becomes a chronic condition as opposed to a short-term thing. And heartburn is what it's saying, that acid is going up into your esophagus, and it's causing some burning. So a GERD and acid reflux, two different things. GERD is chronic, you kind of have it all the time, and acid reflux maybe happens occasionally, and that they also call it heartburn. Those two are probably the same. The other thing that's interesting with acid reflux is a lot of people wind up in the emergency room thinking they have a heart attack, because they feel this thing in their chest, and a lot of times, many times, it turns out to be acid reflux. Okay, next. Okay, these are the signs you have acid reflux. We talked about you have a chronic cough because your throat's irritated. You have difficulty swallowing, which is what I had. Let's get back to that. You got burning sensation, food coming back up, pain in your upper chest. Also, when you're lying down. Really bad idea. I was guilty of this, where I would eat a big meal, and I don't want to watch TV. I would lie back on the couch. Not a good thing, because obviously you're at a parallel position, and the acid's going back up into your throat. So, if you take my advice, if you're eating, don't lay down and watch TV after you eat. Not a good idea. Okay, so how do you know? You'll hear this all the time with people saying, well, your stomach acid is too high, okay? That's actually a misnomer. That's actually totally incorrect. It's not that your stomach acid is too high. It's actually because your stomach acid is too low. Because what happens is with your stomach acid, when you're eating food, the first thing that happens, you have to chew the food, then it gets into your stomach. The acid breaks up the food. Your stomach becomes like a little turning machine where it turns things around and it goes it up. If you don't have enough stomach acid, you can't digest the food correctly. If you can't digest the food correctly, it's going to come back up again. What happens is after the age of 50, your stomach acid, you produce less and less stomach acid. So the problem, in my opinion, the problem is not that you have too much stomach acid. You don't have enough stomach acid because you're not breaking up that food, and that's what the stomach acid does. Okay, so here's the signs that you have a low stomach acid. Again, heartburn, indigestion. You have one of the good things is brittle fingernails, because you're not absorbing B12 and iron and other things. You got basically a burning, bloating with meals. You got constipation, and you get diarrhea after a heavy meal. Again, think about it. If you look at your stomach right there, that's stomach acid. If that stomach acid is not breaking up that food, it's going to go into your small intestine, large intestine, partially undigested, or it can go back up into your esophagus because you haven't digested the food. So again, the problem is not your stomach acid is too high. The problem is your stomach acid is too low. Okay, and these are the major things that your stomach acid does. It sterilizes the food. What happens is if you're eating food and let's say it has some bacteria in it or something like that, your acid is extremely acidic. Our stomach acid is just as acidic as a wolf's, okay? And they're eating like meat and dead things. Let's get back to the stomach acid. It also digests protein. Protein is hard to digest. So if you're eating meat and you don't have enough stomach acid, that's going to sit there. You're going to get that bloating. You're going to get it back up into your throat. Let's get back to that slide, Art. It's going to activate something called pepsin. Pepsin breaks down. It's like meat tenderized. It breaks that down, so it activates that. It also activates something called your intrinsic factor. In order to absorb vitamin B12, you have to produce something called intrinsic factor. So one of the problems with taking PPIs, you don't produce that intrinsic factor, so you cannot manufacture, you can't absorb the vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 is what they call like the energy molecule. It gives you energy. So you could run into big problems if you're not producing enough intrinsic factor. It also stimulates the delivery of bile. In other words, bile breaks down fat, and that comes out of your gallbladder. And also what it does, it triggers the closing of the esophageal sphincter. The esophageal sphincter is the sphincter between your esophagus, between your esophagus and your stomach. So that kind of breaks it up like this. What happens is it tells your stomach acid, it tells it to close. That's what happens, like a little valve. It tells it to close. Okay, let's get back to that slide, Art. The other one, it opens up, it's called the pyloric sphincter. The pyloric sphincter is between, show me, Art. Go back to me. What happens is between the end of the stomach, it goes into your small intestine. So you have two sphincters, one up here and one down here. So this one closes, the acid tells it to close, this one tells it to open, okay? So all those things have to happen. That's why if you don't have enough stomach acid, you're going to run into some problems. Okay, next slide. What causes low stomach acid? One thing, if you overuse antibiotics, H. pylori is a very common infection that people have, and what happens is if you don't have enough stomach acid, H. pylori will cause a lot of problems because the H. pylori, again, it's a bacteria. It's not supposed to be in your stomach. Your stomach acid kills bacteria. You don't have enough stomach acid, the H. pylori will thrive. Poor diet, you're eating a lot of bad stuff. Let's say you're eating real quickly on the go. Again, maybe you're driving. I see people drive and they're eating McDonald's stuff and stuff like that while they're driving. Or you have to really sit down and chew your food and take your time. Let's get back to that slide, Art. Overuse of NSAIDs, basically, the things you take for, anti-inflammatories, or you're using proton pump inhibitors. We're going to get into that. This lowers your stomach acid, obviously, because the whole point of the proton pump inhibitor, proton pump inhibitors is to lower your stomach acid. It also can cause what's called SIBO, which stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. You're not supposed to have certain kinds of bacteria in your small intestine. And because what happens is because the stomach acid is not killing it, it gets into your small intestine, you develop a lot of GI issues. Aging, we talked, you produce less and less stomach acid as you age, or if you have certain food sensitivities to where, you just don't do well with that. So that's the reason why, let's go back to that slide, that's good, Art. What happens is, so this is basically a healthy stomach. You can see at the very top there, that little arrow, it's pointing, it's blocking that little valve off, so the stomach can't get back in. The GERD stomach, you can see that little valve is closed, is opened up, and it goes back in there. But again, the problem is, in most cases, it's not so much to do with it's not the high stomach acid, it's that the valve is not closing correctly. Okay. So how does a GERD affect the risk of developing esophageal cancer? Now, this is the big one. If you see a ENT doctor, if you see basically a GI doctor, they're going to tell you that if you have a possibility of coming down with esophageal cancer, which is scary, obviously. And I'm going to get into some statistics on that. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is good for everybody to understand. This is statistics, okay? And you probably hear all this time, a good example, there's something called relative risk and absolute risk. Hopefully I'll be able to explain that so it's understandable. You hear this all the time. You take our wonder drug, it's going to reduce your risk of heart attack by 50%. Okay, you hear that all the time. But the absolute risk, in other words, the new wonder drug, only reduces your incidence of heart attack. Unless the average person in a year they can have, for 100 people, 2 people will have a heart attack. But if you take this drug, it's going to cut it down to 1. So that's where the 50% comes from, because they're cutting it from a 2 in 100. That's a relatively small number. You only have a 2% chance of coming down. In this case, with esophageal cancer, and then the PPIs, the Prilosec, will cut it down in half. Again, understand the risk is very small to begin with. It's small to begin with, so it's not cutting it like huge. It's cutting it by a very small percentage. This will make sense when I get into the other problems with proton pump inhibitors. Okay, so again, the probability of developing esophageal cancer from GERD and cancer risk. While GERD is common among most people with GERD, they do not develop esophageal cancer. Something called Barrett's esophagus. What happens is if you constantly be exposed to acid reflux, it does a job on your esophagus. Can you back to that slide? So about 10 to 15% of people with chronic GERD, this is ongoing over and over again, will develop Barrett's esophagus. Again, that's still a relatively small number. It's only 10 to 15%. Back to that again. And of the Barrett's esophagus, less than 1% of those will progress to develop esophageal adenocarcinoma. That is a small number, okay? That's a very, very small number. So again, don't believe it. I'm telling you, I'm just giving you the numbers. You make your own decision. The whole point of this show, if you're 50 years old now, you want to start this stuff now. You want to protect your esophagus before you develop a Barrett's esophagus. Okay, back to that. So again, the long-term use of PPIs has been associated with increased risk of developing, this goes back to the reason that the problems with taking PPIs. So the long-term risk of people using proton pump inhibitors has been associated with an increased risk of developing osteopenia and osteoporosis. This is where your bones get weaker and weaker. Some studies suggest that people on long-term PPI therapy have a higher risk of osteoporotic fractures and an odds ratio of about 1.42%. Thanks, Art. For those using PPIs for more than a year, go back to that. This indicates a significant association between prolonged PPI use and the decreased bone mineral density, leading to a condition like osteopenia and osteoporosis. So next slide, Art. What does odds ratio mean? Okay, what it means basically is a measure used in statistics to determine the strength or association between two events. When you see an odds ratio of 1.42, it means that the odds of the event occurring are 1.42% higher in the group being studied, in other words, of people taking the PPI, than to the reference group, people not taking PPI. For example, if a study finds that the odds ratio of developing a certain condition is 1.42 for people who do not use PPIs compared to those who do use PPIs, users have a 42% higher odds of developing this condition. So that's huge, 42%. If you're on a long-term PPI use, you've got to keep an eye on your bone density because those odds are really, really high. So again, the point is the show is not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to give you the percentages. So people tell you PPI, but they're not going to tell you what's the side effects of the PPI. Okay, next slide, Art. My opinion, again, don't believe me, play the odds. Your odds are 42% higher of developing osteoporosis with PPI versus you have a less than 1% chance, even if you have this Barrett's esophagus, okay? Even if you have it, that's developing, that's less than a 1% chance. So that's 42% higher. You're going to develop osteoporosis, then you're going to come down with esophageal cancer. Okay, again, don't believe me, do your own research. I'll send you studies on this. Okay, next, Art. Okay, let's go into proton pump inhibitors. Next. What proton pump inhibitors do, they basically, you have cells in your stomach that secrete acid. So what it does is it calms down those cells so they do not secrete the acid. Next slide. Next slide. slide. Okay, so the effects of the proton pump inhibitors. Remember we talked about B12, the intrinsic factor. You cannot get B12 in because you're taking the PPIs. It reduces your hydrochloric acid so you can't digest a lot of things. So it interferes with a lot of nutrients that you need by taking PPIs. Next slide. Those are the dangers I'm talking about. Okay, next slide. Okay, PPI antacid increase fracture risks. Okay, so in addition to the osteopenia and the osteoporosis, weakening of your bones, they also definitely increase your risk of fracture. Okay, next slide. Here's a big study. Okay, these are over 1 million people, and they followed them up. Those people, again, with the PPIs, they basically, 1,500 had hip fractures, almost 5,000 had forearm or wrist fractures, over 2,000 had clinical spine fractures, and 21,000 plus had the total fractures occurred. So you can see at the very bottom there, so the annual risk of fractures were this, and I can read this a little bit better, and it says, so that's almost a 27% higher risk of fractures if you're taking PPIs. That's a big number. Okay, next slide. Big warning here. Do not go cold turkey with this because you just can't get off your PPIs because it's going to cause you some serious problems. Next slide. So we talked about the parietal cells. These are the cells that are sitting there secreting the hydrochloric acid. What happens is if you go over this cold turkey, your body will try to adapt. Next slide, Art. This is called homeostasis. Your body wants to get back into regulation. So what's happening when you're taking the PPI, those parietal cells are trying to push out that acid like crazy to basically maybe digest your food. But the PPIs are basically pushing them down. So that's why those PPIs keep increasing. So next slide, Art. You get what's called an acid rebound. Because what's happening is your parietal cells, because you stop the PPI cold turkey, they will push out that acid like crazy. And so what will happen then is that your body, your body is trying to push it out. It's going to create worse acid reflux. So you can't go cold turkey off these PPIs. Okay, next slide. This is what's called titration, which means if you get off any medication. I had Donna Bartlett. She is a pharmacist on my show a while ago, and Donna wrote a book called MedStrong, and she calls herself the anti-pharmacist. She tries to get people off drugs, and she talks a lot about this. It's not a good idea to ever get off of anything cold turkey, like even smoking. Right? People they'll go on nicotine patches and stuff like that because it's hard to get off. But it's especially dangerous if you're on a medication to go cold turkey off of anything. So that's a word of warning there. Okay, next slide, Art. These have these little pill cutters. So what'll happen is you can get these at CVS. So if you're taking a pill, maybe cut it into quarters and maybe go to 1 quarter and then a half and see how you're doing. Again, this is not medical advice. This is what I would do. So when I deal with a client about any kind of suggestions, I always preface it with this. This is what I would do if I were you, because I'm not you. But if I were you, this is what I would do. You have different genetics than I do. You have whole different biochemistry than I do. But for most people, it works. But you get that 1 or 2% of people that this doesn't work for. So you got to be careful about this stuff. Okay, next slide, Art. Okay, so what do you do? This is for everybody, hopefully to prevent you. Remember, after age 50, to prevent you from getting this stuff. The first part of digestion is chewing your food. You got to chew your food a lot. It makes it a lot easier for the stomach. A lot of people, they just wolf the food down. Okay, so number one, chew the food. Okay, next slide. Okay, the importance, again, you get better food choices, you get better digestion, you get a heightened sense of taste, you get healthier teeth too, because you're getting a lot of saliva in there. Okay, next slide, Art. Okay, the other thing you can do, apple cider vinegar. I like to take apple cider vinegar pills because apple cider vinegar, what it does is if you run up your teeth, it can break down your enamel. So you want to, if you're going to drink it, don't let it run over your teeth. I take apple cider vinegar pills. In fact, email me, philgeorge@charter.net. I have a whole list of supplements. I'll do a free consult for you, either in person, on the phone, and I can give you this stuff. You got to be careful what kind of apple cider vinegar you get. Not all of it is actually good, so you got to be really careful. So apple cider vinegar does two things. Number one thing it does is increases your stomach acid. So before the meal, I do this before every single meal. I will take my pill of apple cider vinegar, get my stomach acid up, and I was able to cure my acid reflux doing this. So that's one thing I take. The other thing apple cider vinegar does is what they call a glucose disposal agent. Before the meal, it gets sugar out of your body. So if you have, it's good for everybody, but if you get type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes, you get a twofer here. You get not only you get more acid on your stomach, you also get more of the sugar out of your body. So I can't speak highly enough about apple cider vinegar. You can email me with that. Okay, next. Okay, there we go. It gives you energy boost, weight loss. It detoxifies, helps with upset stomach. If you have sinus issue, it clears that. Anti-itch, so it does a ton of stuff. So I can't recommend apple cider vinegar highly enough. But email me because I got to make sure you get the right kind. Okay, next. The other one I take all the time is Manuka honey. Manuka honey is from New Zealand. It's the best honey in the world. It's extremely thick. And what it does is when you take it, it'll coat your throat. Okay, so if you do get a little acid reflux, if it comes back up, you get a coating on the throat with that. So again, email me, philgeorge@charter.net, because I'll give you I get good sources from Manuka honey. It does a tremendous amount of health benefits. Okay, next slide. The other one I do all the time, most people haven't heard of this. This is called slippery elm. And it kind of does what it says it does. It coats your throat, but it coats your throat for a very long period of time. So what I do is I take a slippery, again, I've got acid reflux. I take the slippery elm in a lozenges. So like you suck on a cough drop. And when I was having sore throats and stuff like that, before I go on the air on my radio show or my TV show, what I do is I will suck on that slippery elm lozenge. And what it does is it coats your throat. It will also help. You want to back up that slide 1 second, Art? It also helps. It treats inflammatory bowel disease. It combats heartburn. I don't know about cure, but it helps with dermatitis, sore throat. It helps with weight loss. It helps with asthma. It helps reduce irritation of the urinary tract, and it fights constipation. So this is kind of like the wonder. This is a natural, but again, you got to be careful where you get this from. So I have trusted sources. Again, email me. I'll send you where I get it from. I'll do a free consult for you. Okay, next slide, Art. Other one I take before each meal, this is called proteolytic enzymes. What proteolytic enzymes do is they break up meat. It's like a meat tenderizer. You know, when you put on your meat, it makes it more tender. Meat is really good for you, but it's very hard to digest. So what happens is the proteolytic enzymes, they go into your stomach and they digest the food a lot quicker, makes it easier to digest. Again, I use this basically before each meal again, because what it does is it breaks up that meat, makes it easier to digest. Proteolytic enzymes are really good. Other thing proteolytic enzymes do, if you have any kind of clots and stuff in your arteries, it'll also break up the clot. So again, you get a twofer on the proteolytic enzymes. But you got to be really careful where you get the proteolytic enzymes from. Again, some of them are a lot better than the other one. That's why I want you to contact me to make sure you get it. So back to that slide, Art. Okay, Again, it's a meat tenderizer. That's what it does. It tenderizes the meat, but it does it in your stomach. So if your stomach acid is low, you don't have to work so hard. So it makes it a lot easier to digest the meat if you're doing that. Okay, next slide. Okay, the other thing, this is called migratory motor complex, MCC. What happens is when you're not eating, if you're fasting for a period of time, the amount is 4 hours. This runs a whole cleaning thing for your body. What it does is anything that's in your digestive system, it runs through it and it cleans it up. It cleans it up, all the different parts of your digestive system. So that's the reason why you don't want to. That's the reason why you don't want to be eating all the time. This gives a chance for your body to get in there and clean everything up. So I hope that helps. So it gives you an overview. My point is stop the acid reflux before it stops. If you're age 50 or over, you've got to start this protocol. Again, feel free to email me, philgeorge@charter.net. I can send you over the stuff that I take. Again, I cured my acid reflux. Again, it's not medical advice. They will tell you there's obviously with Barrett's esophagus, there's things that can happen, but you saw the odds I gave up. Odds are relatively low. So we're coming up at the end of the show. Just feel free to email me, philgeorge@charter.net, and we'll be back next week with hopefully more good advice for you. Thanks for tuning in, guys.